The galaxy was a big place, and most of it was peaceful. 4,000 species lived together under the Galactic Concord, a great alliance that kept order across the stars. Wars were rare. Most species had evolved on gentle worlds with soft climates, low gravity, and very few things that could kill them. They were smart, cultured, and kind. They were also very, very fragile. Humanity had joined the Concord only 40 years ago, and in that short time, they had become the most talked about species in the galaxy. Not because of their technology, not because of their culture, but because of where they came from. Earth was classified as a Class 7 death world, a planet so dangerous, so brutal, so full of things that could poison, crush, burn, drown, and eat its inhabitants, that most species refused to believe anyone could survive there at all. They were the apex predators of a world that made other species sick just reading about it. Most aliens kept their distance from humans. They were polite about it, of course. But everyone knew what a Deathworlder was, and nobody wanted to be in the same room as one for too long. Ambassador Velith Shoan had never met a human in person. She was a Merethian, tall, thin, with pale translucent skin, and bones so light they could snap in a strong wind. She served as the chief diplomat on Aethys Prime, a beautiful agricultural colony on the edge of Concord space. 11 million Merethians lived there. They farmed crystal grain and raised gentle animals and watched their 3 suns set over fields of silver grass every evening. It was paradise. It was paradise until the sky turned black. The first warning came from the orbital sensors. A fleet of ships had entered the system. Big ships, ugly ships, covered in what looked like living bone and dark flesh. They moved in a tight formation, like insects swarming, and they were heading straight for the planet. Velith stood in the control center and watched the sensor screens with growing terror. She knew what those ships were. Every species in the galaxy knew, even though no one had seen them in 10,000 years. The Vraxith Dominion. They were a hive mind, a single vast intelligence spread across millions of bodies. They did not negotiate, they did not trade, they did not talk. They consumed. 10,000 years ago, they had eaten their way across an entire arm of the galaxy before vanishing into the dark spaces between the stars. Everyone had hoped they were dead. They were not dead. The Vraxith ships reached orbit and began firing without a single word. Great beams of sickly green light stabbed down from the sky and struck the northern continent. Cities vanished, fields burned. The ground itself cracked open and glowed with heat. The screaming started immediately. Millions of voices crying out across every communication channel. Velith's hands shook so badly she could barely operate her console. She sent a distress call to the Galactic Concord's nearest fleet. The response came back in seconds, and it destroyed what little hope she had left. 9 days. The nearest Concord fleet was 9 days away. Aethys Prime would not survive 9 hours. Around her, the control center was falling apart. Ceiling panels crashed down. Screens flickered and died. Her staff ran in every direction, trying to coordinate evacuations to the underground shelters. Velith could hear the bombardment through the walls, a deep, endless rumbling, like the planet itself was groaning in pain. She looked at her console and saw one last option. A small icon in the corner of her screen, the Terran Emergency Beacon. Humanity had given one to every allied world when they joined the Concord. It was a simple device. Press it, and a signal would go out on a special frequency that only human ships could receive. Most species had treated it as a diplomatic gift, a polite gesture with no real meaning. Velith had never thought about using it. She had never thought she would need to. She thought about it now. She thought about the stories she had heard about humans, how they could run for hours without stopping, how they could survive injuries that would kill any other species, how they ate the flesh of dead animals and drank a poison called alcohol for fun. how their planet was covered in deserts, frozen wastelands, boiling jungles, and oceans full of monsters, how their history was an endless river of blood and war. She was afraid of the Vraxith, but part of her was also afraid of what she might be calling. Another explosion shook the building. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a child screaming. Velith pressed the beacon. The signal went out at faster than light speed, racing through the void in every direction. It passed through empty systems and dead nebulae and the cold spaces where no star shone. It traveled for 14 hours before it reached a small cluster of ships on a routine patrol in deep space. The UTS Prometheus was a Deathworlder-class heavy dreadnought, 2 kilometers of armored steel, bristling with weapons, carrying a crew of 4,000 humans. It was the flagship of the United Terran Navy's 7th Expeditionary Fleet, known across the service as the Iron Tide. 42 warships in total, each one built to survive the kind of punishment that would reduce a Concorde vessel to scrap metal. Captain Reese Tanaka was on the bridge when the beacon signal came in. He was a quiet man with dark eyes and steady hands, the kind of officer who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He listened to the signal, Ambassador Velith's broken, panicked voice pleading for help over a background of explosions and screaming, and felt something cold settle in his chest. He forwarded the signal to Fleet Admiral Kara Mwangi. Admiral Mwangi was a legend in the Terran Navy. She had fought in 3 wars, commanded ships since she was 30, and had a reputation for being both brilliant and completely terrifying. She listened to the signal once, then she listened to it again, then she stood up from her chair. Every officer on the flagship's command deck turned to look at her. "All hands," she said, and her voice was calm and steady and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Battle stations, set course for Aethys Prime, best speed." The order went out to all 42 ships. Within minutes, the entire 7th Fleet changed direction. Engines roared to full power. Weapon systems came online. Armor plating locked into combat position. 4,000 humans on each ship moved to their stations with practice speed, checking weapons, sealing suits, running final diagnostics. The alien liaison officer aboard the Prometheus, a small avian creature named Drix, watched the humans prepare and felt something he could not explain. They were not afraid. Their heart rates were elevated, yes. Their pupils were dilated. Their muscles were tense. But this was not fear. This was anticipation. The Iron Tide turned toward Aethys Prime, and the dark of space swallowed them whole. Aethys Prime was dying. 12 hours of bombardment had turned the northern continent into a wasteland of fire and smoke. Cities that had taken centuries to build were now nothing but craters filled with glowing rubble. The beautiful silver fields were ash. The rivers had boiled away. The sky, once pale blue with streaks of gold from the 3 suns, was now a choking blanket of black clouds, lit from below by endless fires. Ambassador Velith Shoan crouched in an underground bunker with 300 refugees. The walls shook with every impact. Dust fell like snow. Children cried in the dark corners, while their parents held them close and whispered lies about everything being okay. Velith had stopped hoping. The Concorde fleet was still days away. The beacon she had activated had brought nothing but silence. She sat against the cold wall and stared at her hands and wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe they had heard and decided it was not their problem. Maybe they were too far away. Or maybe they were coming, and that was worse. She had heard what humans did in war. She had read the reports from their history, the trenches, the firebombing, the nuclear weapons they had used on their own kind. A species that did that to itself, what would it do to others? Above them, on the surface, the Vraxith had begun landing ground forces. Dropships the color of dried blood descended through the smoke and opened like wounds, spilling out warriors by the thousands. Each Vraxith soldier stood 3 meters tall, covered in black armor that was part of its own body. They had 4 arms ending in blades of bone. They had no eyes. They saw through the hive mind, through each other, through the collective intelligence that connected every single one of them into a single terrible will. The colony's security forces tried to fight. They lasted minutes. Myrethians were not built for combat. Their weapons were designed for scaring away wild animals, not for stopping armored killing machines. The Vraxith walked through their defenses like they were made of paper, and began moving toward the population centers. In her bunker, Velith heard the security channels go silent one by one. Each silence was a death. Then something changed. A young technician at the bunker's sensor station sat up suddenly, his translucent skin flushing with color. "Ambassador," he said, his voice cracking, "I am detecting faster-than-light signatures at the edge of the system." Velith felt nothing. She had no hope left to feel with. "The Concord fleet is days away," she said flatly. "These are not Concord signatures," the technician whispered. "These are Terran." Velith stood up. In orbit, the Vraxith fleet detected the contacts at the same moment. 42 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a distance that made every alien tactician in the galaxy gasp when they later reviewed the data. The humans had exited FTL so close to the planet that the margin of error was measured in kilometers. A miscalculation of even a fraction would have sent them crashing into the planet itself or into the heart of a sun. No sane species would attempt such a thing. Humans were many things. Sane was not always one of them. The 7th Fleet arrived in combat formation, already armed, already targeting, already firing. The first Vraxith ship exploded before the light of the fleet's arrival had finished fading. Admiral Mwangi stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. The Vraxith fleet was large, over 100 ships, all bristling with organic weapons and surrounded by clouds of smaller fighter drones. Against any Concord fleet, they would have been unstoppable. Against the Iron Tide, they lasted 3 hours. The human ships fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They moved in tight formations, covering each other, drawing enemy fire, and then punishing it with concentrated volleys that tore through Vraxith hulls like claws through flesh. When a human destroyer lost its main guns, its captain turned the ship around and rammed it into a Vraxith cruiser at full speed, detonating both vessels in a ball of white fire. The crew had evacuated to escape pods 30 seconds before impact. They were picked up by another destroyer and immediately asked to be reassigned to a ship that was still fighting. The Vraxith hive mind did not understand what was happening. It had consumed hundreds of species across thousands of years. Prey species ran. Prey species hid. Prey species surrendered and begged and died quietly. These creatures were not running. These creatures were attacking. They were pushing forward into fire that should have destroyed them. They were taking damage that should have killed them, and continuing to fight. And the sounds coming from their communication channels, the hive mind intercepted them and tried to analyze them. The humans were laughing. They were playing music, loud, rhythmic, aggressive music that pounded through their ships like a second heartbeat. They were shouting to each other, calling out kills, encouraging each other, making jokes in the middle of a battle that should have terrified them. One human pilot, her fighter trailing smoke and missing a wing, flew directly into the hangar bay of a Vraxith carrier, ejected at the last second, and cheered as her ship exploded inside the enemy vessel. In her bunker, Velith listened to the battle on an open channel. She heard Admiral Mwangi's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear and strong. "Aethys Prime, this is the United Terran Navy 7th Expeditionary Fleet. We received your signal. We are here. Nobody is dying on our watch. Velet's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor. Around her, the refugees listened with wide eyes as the sounds of battle raged overhead. But now the explosions were happening in orbit, not on the surface. Now the dying was happening to the Vraxith. The battle ended with the Vraxith fleet broken and scattering. Burning wrecks tumbled through orbit, trailing smoke and organic debris. The surviving Vraxith ships fled to the outer system to regroup, wounded and confused. The hive mind was processing something entirely new, a sensation it had no name for, no reference for, no understanding of. It had been hurt. It had been afraid. The skies above Aethys Prime cleared, not of smoke, but of enemies. Captain Tanaka's voice came through on the planetary communication channel, directed at the bunkers below. His tone was warm and steady, the voice of someone who had done this before, and would do it again as many times as necessary. Ambassador Shoan, this is Captain Tanaka, of the UTS Prometheus. We have cleared your orbital space. Vraxith ground forces remain on the surface, but that will not be the case for long. We are deploying Marines now. Please remain in your shelters. We will come to you. Veleth looked up at the ceiling of the bunker, as if she could see through it, through the rock and the smoke and the burning sky. She heard a new sound, a deep rumbling roar that grew louder and louder. Through the bunker's external cameras, she saw them. Hundreds of drop pods, streaking through the atmosphere like falling stars, trailing fire and smoke. Each one carried a squad of Terran Marines, the most dangerous ground soldiers in the known galaxy. The pods hit the ground with impacts that shook the earth. Hatches blew open. Armored figures poured out into the smoke and ruin, weapons up, already moving, already hunting. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the Vraxith, for the first time in 10,000 years, were the prey. The surface of Aethys Prime looked like the end of the world. Smoke rose from the ruins of cities that had been standing just hours ago. The ground was cracked and scorched. Fires burned in every direction, painting the sky a sick orange. The air was thick with ash and the smell of things burning that should never burn. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vasquez stepped out of her drop pod and took a deep breath through her helmet filters. Her armor was heavy and scarred from years of service. Her rifle was old but well-maintained. Her eyes, behind the visor, were sharp and hard and constantly moving. She was the leader of Fireteam Hellhound, 8 Marines, all veterans, all volunteers for this mission. They had dropped into the northern continent, right into the middle of Vraxith-held territory, and their job was simple. Find survivors, protect them, kill anything that got in the way. The Marethians of Aethys Prime had never seen humans in person before. The first group of refugees that Vasquez's team found were hiding in the basement of a collapsed school. When the Marines broke through the rubble and shone their lights inside, the Marethians screamed. To them, the humans were terrifying, huge by Marethian standards, thick with muscle and bone, encased in dark armor, carrying weapons that looked like they were designed to kill gods. Their movements were fast and aggressive. They breathed air that was too thick and walked in gravity that was too strong, and seemed completely comfortable doing both. Vasquez pulled off her helmet. She had a round face, dark skin, and a scar that ran from her left ear to her jaw. She looked at the terrified Marethians and did something that confused every single one of them. She smiled. "Hey," she said softly. "It is okay. We are the good guys. Let us get you somewhere safe." The Marethians did not understand her words at first. The translators took a moment to catch up, but they understood the tone. They understood the open hands and the gentle voice and the way she crouched down to make herself smaller, less threatening. One by one, they came out of hiding. Vasquez's team moved through the ruins, collecting refugees as they went. The work was slow and dangerous. Vraxith ground forces were everywhere. Patrols of chitinous warriors that moved through the rubble on 4 legs, their blade arms clicking and scraping against the broken stone. Each one was 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor as tough as steel. Their acid blood could eat through metal in seconds. They killed without thought, without hesitation, without mercy, because they had none. They were extensions of the hive mind, and the hive mind knew only hunger. The Marines killed them anyway. The first contact came at a ruined intersection. A Vraxith patrol, 6 warriors, came around a corner and found Fireteam Hellhound waiting. The Marines fired with precision that came from thousands of hours of training. They aimed for the joints, for the gaps in the natural armor, for the soft tissue at the base of the skull. 6 Vraxith warriors dropped, twitching and leaking acid blood that hissed and smoked on the ground. The refugees watched in stunned silence. They had seen their own security forces die against single Vraxith warriors. These humans had killed 6 without losing a step. But the Vraxith were not easy prey, even for Deathworlders. There were thousands of them on the surface, and they learned fast. The hive mind adapted with every encounter, changing tactics, probing for weaknesses, testing the humans. In one brutal fight near a collapsed bridge, a Vraxith warrior got close enough to grab a Marine's rifle and crush it. The Marine pulled his sidearm and shot the creature 6 times in the face. When another warrior lunged at Vasquez from behind a wall, knocking her weapon away, she drew her combat knife, a simple blade of hardened steel, and drove it into the creature's throat with both hands. The Vraxith fell. Vasquez pulled the knife free, wiped it on her leg, and kept moving. An alien observer, watching the helmet camera footage from orbit, turned off the display and sat in silence for a very long time. It was near the edge of a destroyed residential area that Vasquez found the child. The little Merethian was huddled inside the shell of a burned vehicle, arms wrapped around their knees, shaking so hard their translucent skin flickered with color. They could not have been more than 5 years old in human terms. Their clothes were torn and covered in ash. They were alone. Vasquez saw the child and stopped. She held up a fist, and her entire team froze behind her. She slung her rifle across her back, removed her helmet again, and approached the vehicle slowly. She crouched down until she was at eye level with the child. The little one looked at her with huge, wet eyes full of terror. Terror of the explosions. Terror of the monsters that had come from the sky. And terror of this strange, heavy creature that was now kneeling in front of them. "Hey there, little one," Vasquez said quietly. "My name is Elena. What is yours?" The child said nothing, just shook. Vasquez reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a ration bar. It was not much, a dense block of nutrients that tasted like chocolate and cardboard mixed together. She held it out. The child stared at it, then slowly, with a tiny trembling hand, they took it. "Ticrelli," the child whispered. "Ticrelli," Vasquez repeated gently. "That is a beautiful name. I am going to keep you safe now, okay? You stay with me." She picked the child up carefully, placed Ticrelli on her back, secured them with a strap from her kit, and stood up. She put her helmet back on, brought her rifle to her shoulder, and nodded to her team. They moved on. Word spread through the refugee networks. The Deathworlders were not just fighting, they were protecting. They carried the wounded on their backs. They gave their food to hungry children. They stood in front of unarmed civilians and faced the Vraxith without flinching. One Marine, his arm broken and hanging useless at his side, continued to fight with his sidearm for 2 more hours before his squad leader physically forced him to sit down and accept medical treatment. His only complaint was that he was not helping enough. The Merethians began to look at the humans differently. The fear did not go away completely. How could it, when these creatures could crush a Vraxith warrior with their bare hands? But it mixed with something else. Something warmer. Meanwhile, in orbit, Admiral Mwangi was staring at her sensor display with an expression that would have frightened anyone who knew her well. The long-range sensors had detected something at the edge of the system, a massive energy signature. Hundreds of FTL contacts, moving in formation. The Vraxith had called for reinforcements. Not a patrol fleet, not a raiding party, a full invasion armada. Over 800 ships, each one larger and more heavily armed, and the vessels the Seventh Fleet had already destroyed. Mwangi ran the numbers in her head, 42 ships against 800. The math was simple, and the answer was death. She opened a priority channel to Terran Command, encoded and encrypted at the highest level. This is Fleet Admiral Mwangi, 7th Expeditionary Fleet. Aethys Prime is under full-scale Vraxith assault. Enemy reinforcements incoming. Estimated 800-plus capital ships. Requesting immediate reinforcement. All available assets. I repeat, all available assets. This is not a raid. This is a war. The message traveled at faster than light speed across the galaxy, through relay stations and communication buoys, until it reached a room deep beneath the surface of Earth. The Terran Admiralty, the highest military authority in human space, gathered around a table and listened to Mwangi's message in complete silence. When it ended, the Fleet Marshal, an old man with white hair and steady hands, looked around the table at his officers. "Wake the Armada," he said. Across the Sol system, from the shipyards of Mars to the orbital stations above Jupiter, hundreds of warships began to stir. Engines that had been cold for months roared back to life. Crews who had been on leave were recalled in minutes. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities detached from their moorings and turned their bows toward the stars. All of it. The Vraxith Armada arrived like a dark cloud rolling across the stars. 812 ships. The sensors counted them one by one as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Aethys system. Each ship was massive, covered in living bone and dark organic armor, bristling with weapons that glowed with sickly green energy. Clouds of fighter drones surrounded them like insects around a hive. The combined mass of the fleet was so large that it actually bent the light of distant stars around it. Admiral Mwangi stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the tactical display. 42 red dots, her ships, sat between the planet and the wall of green that was the Vraxith Armada. The math had not changed since her message to Earth. 42 against 800. Her fleet was outgunned, outmassed, and outnumbered by a factor of 20. She did not order a retreat. The officers on her bridge watched her carefully. They knew the numbers. They knew what those numbers meant, and they watched their admiral stand there, bruised and tired, and still wearing the same uniform she had been wearing for 30 straight hours. And they saw something in her face that was beyond courage. It was certainty. Not certainty that they would win, but certainty that they would not leave. Mwangi opened a channel to the entire fleet. Every ship, every crew member, every Marine still fighting on the surface heard her voice. "This is Admiral Mwangi. I will not lie to you. What is coming for us is bigger than anything we have faced. The Vraxith sent their full armada because we hurt them, and they are angry, and they want to finish this. Behind us is a planet full of people who called for help. 11 million lives. Children, families, people who trusted us enough to press that beacon. That trust is sacred. We do not break it. We do not run. We hold this line no matter what." The silence on the channel was absolute. "It has been the honor of my life to serve with you. Now let us show these things what a Deathworlder fleet can do. All ships, combat formation, weapons free." The Seventh Fleet spread into a defensive wall between the planet and the approaching armada. Every gun was charged. Every torpedo was loaded. Every pilot was in their cockpit. The ships hummed with the quiet energy of 4,000 humans per vessel. All of them ready, all of them willing, none of them planning to survive. planning only to make the enemy pay for every meter of space. The Vraxith armada advanced. When it reached weapons range, the sky lit up. The battle was beyond anything the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. The Vraxith fired in waves, great pulses of green energy that washed over the human fleet like a toxic tide. The Terran ships shuddered and burned under the assault. Armor plating melted. Oxygen vented into space in white plumes that froze instantly into clouds of crystal. The humans fired back. Every ship, every gun, every missile system poured destruction into the Vraxith line. The concentrated firepower was staggering. Beams of white-hot energy that cut through organic hulls, kinetic rounds that punched through armor like fists through glass, nuclear-tipped torpedoes that turned Vraxith capital ships into expanding balls of fire. But there were too many. For every Vraxith ship that died, 3 more took its place. The human fleet was taking terrible damage. Ships lost engines, lost weapons, lost entire sections of their hull. Crews sealed broken compartments and kept fighting. Medical teams dragged wounded from collapsed corridors and set up field hospitals in cargo bays. Engineers made repairs under fire, welding metal with plasma torches while the deck shook beneath their feet. The destroyer UTS Valiant lost its main engines and drifted, powerless, directly into the path of a Vraxith dreadnought. Its captain, a young woman named Torres, had 30 seconds to make a decision. She ordered all hands to abandon ship, waited until the last escape pod launched, and then aimed her dying ship at the Vraxith dreadnought and fired every remaining weapon at point-blank range. Both ships died together in a flash of light so bright it blinded sensors across the system. Captain Torres was 29 years old. The Galactic Concord observer ships had arrived at the edge of the system, too far away to help, close enough to watch. Dozens of alien species sat at their screens and watched the battle in stunned, horrified silence. They had never seen anything like this. The energy readings alone were beyond what their instruments were designed to measure. The aggression, the willingness to die, the absolute refusal to give ground. It did not match any model of warfare they understood. One Concord analyst, a mathematician from a species known for its calm logic, watched a human frigate with half its hull missing turn back into the fight, and whispered, "What are they?" No one had an answer. The 7th Fleet was dying. 12 ships were gone. Another 10 were crippled. Mwangi's flagship had taken 3 direct hits. Half her bridge crew was wounded. She had a piece of metal in her shoulder that she had not had time to remove. Blood ran down her arm and dripped onto the deck. She was still standing. She was still giving orders. She was still fighting. And then the sensors lit up. New contacts, hundreds of them, dropping out of FTL on the far side of the system and accelerating at speeds that should not have been possible. The signatures were Terran. The Armada had arrived. 327 warships, the largest Terran fleet ever assembled. Dreadnoughts, carriers, battlecruisers, destroyers, and at their center, the flagship UTS Unconquered Sun, a vessel so large it had its own gravity. The fleet poured into the system like a river of steel and fire, already in combat formation, already targeting, already beginning to fire. The Vraxith hive mind felt the new arrivals, and for a single frozen moment, the entire armada hesitated. Every drone, every warrior, every ship paused as the collective intelligence processed what it was seeing. More Deathworlders, not a few more, hundreds more. An entire civilization's worth of warships, all aimed at them, all moving with the same terrible purpose. The Terran armada hit the Vraxith line like a hammer hitting glass. Fresh Terran ships tore into the Vraxith flanks, breaking their formation, isolating groups of ships, and destroying them with concentrated fire. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers and swarmed the Vraxith drones, outflying them, outfighting them, turning the clouds of organic fighters into clouds of organic debris. Marine boarding parties, humans in heavy armor, carrying rifles and explosives, launched themselves across the void in assault shuttles, breached the hulls of Vraxith ships, and fought the aliens face to face in their own corridors. Another, trapped in a dead-end corridor with 3 Vraxith closing in, detonated a grenade in his own hand and took all 3 with him. His squadmates found his dog tags later and added his name to the list. The list was getting long. On the surface, the tide turned just as completely. The massive marine offensive, supported by orbital strikes from the Armada, pushed the Vraxith ground forces back toward their landing zones. Vasquez led Fireteam Hellhound through the final assault. Ticrelli, still strapped to her back, the child's face buried in her neck as she fired and moved and fired again. City by city, district by district, the humans took back the colony. The Vraxith hive mind made a calculation. It had not made this calculation in 10,000 years, because it had never needed to. The calculation was simple: continue fighting and be destroyed, or retreat and survive. The hive mind chose survival. The Vraxith Armada turned and fled. All 800 remaining ships, battered, burning, leaking atmosphere and organic fluid, broke formation and ran for the edge of the system. The Terran Armada pursued, snapping at their heels, destroying stragglers, herding the survivors toward open space. On the bridge of her shattered flagship, Admiral Mwangi watched them go. She was leaning on her console because her legs would no longer fully support her. The metal was still in her shoulder. Her uniform was more red than blue. "Do not come back," she whispered. On the surface of Aethys Prime, the guns fell silent for the first time in days. The smoke still rose, the fires still burned, but the shooting stopped. Vasquez knelt down and carefully unstrapped Ticrelli from her back. She set the child down gently on a piece of clean ground and looked at them. The little Merethian looked back with those huge, wet eyes, still scared, still shaking, but alive. Ticrelli reached up with both small hands and touched Vasquez's scarred face. Then, in broken, barely understandable Terran Standard, words the child must have learned from listening to the Marines talk over the past 2 days, Ticrelli spoke. "Thank you, Big One." Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vasquez, who had fought in 4 campaigns and killed more enemies than she could count, and had not shed a tear in 15 years of service, sat down in the ash and the rubble and cried. 3 weeks after the battle, Aethys Prime was still wounded, but no longer dying. The smoke had cleared enough to see the suns again. The fires on the northern continent had been put out, one by one, by teams of human firefighters who had arrived on civilian transport ships along with thousands of other volunteers. Engineers from Earth built temporary shelters in neat rows across the safe zones. Doctors from Mars set up field hospitals and treated Merethian patients with a gentleness that surprised everyone who saw it. Teachers from the lunar colonies organized activities for the children so their parents could rest. Construction workers from the asteroid belts cleared rubble with heavy machines and steady hands. The same species that had torn the Vraxith apart with terrifying violence was now planting gardens in the ashes. Velith watched it all from the window of a temporary office that smelled like fresh plastic and human coffee. She still did not fully understand humans. She was not sure she ever would. But she understood one thing. They had come when no one else could. They had bled for a world that was not their own, and now they were helping rebuild it without being asked. She did not know what to call that. The Merethian language did not have a word for it. The humans called it duty. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Concord was in crisis. The emergency session had been called within hours of the battle's end, and delegates from thousands of species gathered in the Grand Assembly, a vast circular chamber on the Concord's capital station. Holographic screens showed footage from the battle. Sensor data scrolled across displays. Every delegate had seen the recordings, and every delegate was afraid. Not of the Vraxith, of the humans. The debate was fierce. A delegate from the Shelvari Collective, a species of tall crystalline beings, stood and spoke first. We have all seen what the humans did at Aethys Prime. They destroyed an armada of 800 ships. They boarded enemy vessels and fought hand-to-hand. They used nuclear weapons. They rammed their own ships into the enemy. He paused, his crystal body vibrating with tension. If they can do that to the Vraxith, what could they do to us? Murmurs spread through the chamber. Other delegates stood and echoed the fear. The humans were too strong, too violent, too unpredictable. Proposals were made, sanctions, restrictions on human military expansion, even the creation of buffer zones around Terran space. One delegate, speaking anonymously, suggested preemptive containment. The chamber buzzed with argument. The fear was real, and it was spreading. Then Admiral Karamowangi walked in. She had been invited to address the assembly as a representative of the Terran government. She walked slowly. She was still healing from her injuries, and she refused to use a hover chair because she said her legs worked fine. She wore a clean uniform, but the scars on her face and hands were visible, and she made no effort to hide them. She was shorter than most of the alien delegates. She was also, in that moment, the most dangerous person in the room, and everyone knew it. She stood at the central podium and looked out at the thousands of faces. Crystalline, feathered, scaled, tentacled, translucent. And she spoke. "I know you are afraid of us," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the acoustics of the chamber carried it to every corner. "I understand. I have seen the footage too. I know what it looks like from the outside. I know we are loud and violent and difficult to understand. I know our world frightens you. I know our history frightens you." She paused. "Let me tell you about our world. Earth is a planet that has been trying to kill us since the day we crawled out of the ocean. We evolved alongside predators that could outrun us, outswim us, and outfight us. We survived ice ages that froze half our planet. We survived diseases that killed millions in months. We survived volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, and storms that flattened entire regions. And yes, we survived each other. We fought wars that burned cities to the ground. We split the atom and used it as a weapon. We nearly destroyed ourselves more times than I can count." She looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, still stained with traces of burn cream. "But we are still here. And the reason we are still here is not because we are the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. It is because when the darkness comes, we hold the line. When someone screams for help, we run toward the sound. When a child is afraid, we pick them up and carry them. That is what we are. That is what Earth made us. Not just killers, protectors. We did not evolve to conquer the galaxy. We evolved to survive. And somewhere along the way, we decided that survival means nothing if it's only for ourselves." The chamber watched her in silence. "I activated the Terran beacon," Velith said, and her voice was steady, even though her hands were not. "I want you all to know that I was afraid. Not just of the Vraxith. I was afraid of the humans. I had read the same reports you have read. I had heard the same stories. When I pressed that button, I did not know if I was calling for salvation or for a different kind of destruction." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were bright with emotion. "Let me tell you what happened. The humans came. They fought the Vraxith in space and on the ground. They bled for us. They died for us. I watched their Marines carry our wounded through fire. I watched their medics treat our people before treating their own. I watched a soldier, a woman named Vasquez, find a lost child in the ruins of the city. That child was terrified of everything, including her. And this woman, this Deathworlder who had just killed 3 Vraxith warriors with a knife, took off her helmet, knelt down, and gave that child a piece of food. She carried that child on her back for 2 days. She fought with one hand, so the other could hold the little one steady. Vellet's voice cracked, but she continued. After the battle, when the guns were silent, I saw their soldiers weep, not for themselves, for the people they could not save. I saw humans, these terrifying, impossible creatures from a world of nightmares, sit in the ashes and cry because a Merithian child had died in a collapsed building, and they had arrived too late. She looked out at the assembly. Thousands of alien faces stared back at her. You ask what manner of creature humanity is. I will tell you. They are the monsters who come when children cry. They are the darkness that protects the light. They are the fire that burns to keep others warm. I was afraid too. But I am telling you, if you are ever lost, and afraid, and alone, and the void is closing in around you, pray that your signal reaches the humans first. Because they will come. They will always come. The silence that followed was the longest in the history of the Galactic Concord. Then, one by one, the delegates began to vote. The proposal for sanctions failed. The proposal for containment failed. Instead, a new motion was introduced, one that had never existed before in the Concord's long history. By an overwhelming majority, the Assembly voted to grant humanity the title of Galactic Guardians, official protectors of the Alliance, sworn defenders of any world that called for help. Admiral Mwangi accepted the title on behalf of her species with a simple nod. She did not smile. The weight of what the title meant was not something to smile about. On Aethys Prime, life slowly returned to normal. The shelters came down, new buildings went up. The silver fields were replanted. Children played in the streets again, watched over by Merithian parents, and for a little while longer, by human volunteers who would eventually go home, but who would never forget this place. Ticrelli kept the empty wrapper from the ration bar that Vasquez had given them. They kept it folded in a small box by their bed, and every night before they slept, they touched it once, like a prayer. Years later, when Ticrelli was grown, they stood at the entrance of a Terran military academy, the first Merithian ever to apply. The admissions officer, a human woman with kind eyes, asked why they wanted to join. Ticrelli thought about a burning city, a dark hiding place, a heavy, scarred hand offering food, a voice saying, I am going to keep you safe now. Because a human showed me, Ticrelli said quietly, that strength and kindness are the same thing. Far away, in the cold space between galaxies, the Vraxith hive mind nursed its wounds. It had consumed worlds beyond counting. It had destroyed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. It had never been stopped, never been beaten, never been afraid. Until now. The hive mind reached out with its vast consciousness, probing the edges of known space, searching for weakness, for opportunity, for prey. Its awareness touched the border of Terran space, and it felt the presence that lived there, the energy, the aggression, the watchfulness, the memory of fire and steel, and creatures that laughed while they fought. The hive mind pulled back. Deep within its ancient intelligence, it encoded a new directive. Not a strategy, not a plan, a single command, burned into every drone, every warrior, every ship, every fragment of the collective mind, permanent and absolute. Avoid the Deathworlders. Avoid them at all costs.